my name is Christine and welcome to my YouTube channel. So today I'm going to be making a purse using a free pattern that I found online, this purse right here, and I'm going to be running you through the process as to how I made it as a beginner sewer. Without further ado, let's get on into the process. Here are the materials I'm going to be using. So I have here a big long zipper, and you're supposed to just cut this to the length that you need. And then here's some different size D-rings and then some fusible fleece to give the purse some structure. And then here is a tablecloth that I thrifted that I've been using in some sewing projects recently that I think would actually make into a cute purse. These are half of the bag, and so you place this side along the fold, and then once you cut it out of the fabric, it'll look something like this. And then when you flip it open, you've got yourself a whole Baguette bag. And then same here with this. So I have this half piece right here that I've pre-cut, and then this is the whole strip that will be used in the bag. So now onto the interfacing, which is this big sheet of fleece essentially. And so I laid my pattern pieces out and I'm just going to be cutting along the edges. I think that there's already seam allowance built into this, but I'm about to find out when I actually start sewing. But yeah, I'm just gonna take my rotary cutter and then cut around these edges. The next step here is to line up the fleece interfacing with the fabric, making sure that the textured adhesive side is facing the fabric. And then you line up the two pieces right sides together, pin around the edges, and then test a piece of fabric first to make sure that your tension is correct. I find that this is really useful so that way you don't find out that your tension is incorrect halfway through your project. And the tension here looks fine, so I'm going to get started. And here I'm sewing the right sides together, making sure to be extra careful around the corners as sometimes the corners get a little bit wonky, and then I'm finishing it with a back stitch. The next step here is to flip this part right side in so that you have the outer fabric facing the outside now. And the next step is to repeat that process all over again, making sure to match up the middle of the face of the bag with the middle of the, base of the bag, pinning it all together and then sewing it all along the edges as you did before. Now, the most satisfying part, flipping the entire thing right side in and then admiring that a little bit wrinkly bag, but we'll iron that out later, no big deal. So I actually accidentally made it a little bit uneven, so here I'm just trimming off the excess edge. This is honestly totally fine. I didn't think that it made that much of a difference in the final product. And then here I'm just doing the lining, literally repeating the same exact process, but instead I'm marking the middle with a washable marker to make sure that I can match all of those middle, midpoint seams together. I got so excited to be done with this inner lining. It wasn't hard. I just was excited because I got to flip something inside out again. But then I actually quickly realized that you have to keep it flipped inside out because you're going to stick it inside of your bag and sandwich those ugly seams between the lining and the fabric of the bag so that when someone reaches their hand inside of the purse, they just have this clean, hidden seamed entity, I suppose. The next step is to measure the circumference of the bag to know how long you need to make your bias tape. And so I measured mine to about 10 inches by 1.5 inches. So I doubled that and then added a couple extra inches for seam allowance. And so here I'm at the cutting board, measuring that out and making it about 1.5 inches thick, which I soon realized was too thin, and it's going to cause some issues that you'll see real soon. The next step here is to pin the bias tape to the edge of the bag, making sure that those two edges are perfectly aligned, and doing this around the entire bag. And then once you get to the end, I had a little bit of fabric left over. I made it a little bit too long, so you pin those two together and not overlapping on the bag. And then you're just going to sew about 1/2 inch away from the top of the bag. I finished sewing the bias tape to the bag, but I forgot to show this part. So when I said that you need to sew those two ends of the bias tape together, here's a really poor visual of what I mean. So if you see that tiny seam right there, that's what I did. And then now you just fold the bias tape over the top again, and then do a double fold on the inside of it so that all the seams are hidden. And here I'm doing that double fold. And this is when I realized that I had effed up because I had no seam allowance to work with, essentially. To try to correct my mistakes, I had to sew really, really carefully and really close to the edge of the double rolled hem in order to secure everything inside. And then even so, at the end of it, I still had a bunch of fraying edges that had popped out of that double rolled hem. So besides the unfortunate looking hem of my bag, this is what it looks like so far, and I'm pretty happy with it. But the next step is to make the strap. So I'm measuring the side of the bag at around 1 inch, making my strap double that plus an inch of seam allowance, and then just marking it so that it's a straight line, and then cutting all the way through my fabric, which stops at basically 36 inches since it is folded in half. In the next clip coming up, I'll be folding in the edges of this strap like so, and then ironing it down with my flat iron since I don't have space for a real iron at the moment. But honestly, this works just as well, if not better, because it's so convenient. So I actually messed up the first strap and then redid it, and so I don't have footage of the second one because I just forgot to do it. But essentially you just take a strip of interfacing and then put it in between that strip that I just showed you, and then fold it in half and then sew straight parallel to each other along the length of the strap, if that makes sense. I would have re-demonstrated it, but I didn't want to waste any fabric, so here we are. But here I'm doing those little loops that go on the ends of the purse, and that will hold that D-ring. And so I'm just tucking in those raw edges to make sure everything is concealed, and then I'm going to be folding that in half and stitching with a straight stitch over it once I put the D-ring through it. And so now I'll be attaching that D-ring with the loop onto the bag and then sewing that straight stitch over it. So I tried to get a little fancy with it, and I saw someone else do this, so I tried it. They don't look great, but they're secure as hell. But the next step was to put in the zipper. So I attached these straps. I ended up taking them out later. But here's the zipper. I have it pinned down a little bit below the lip of the bag. That way when you zip it up, it's mostly concealed. So using a zipper foot, I'm just going to sew that down now. Disclaimer here, I definitely didn't use the zipper foot correctly, but I just had no idea how to do it. But this is the final step and we are done. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this tutorial was helpful, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. See you next time.